So we're going to start with looking at a bit of code today, and unfortunately we're going to take a look at that code on GitHub instead of in the coding environment. After that, we're going to talk about and continue to talk about views and input and discuss that a little bit. And after that, hopefully, I'm going to do a little bit of programming so that we can see how we create a model view controller solution. Yeah. But first, okay, we're going to check out two picker projects, one user picker and one color picker. And yeah, so we're going to start with the user picker program. And yeah, just before we started, let's go back a couple of slides, so to speak, to what is model view controller and why do we want it. Model view controller was an architecture for program code, right? So it's an architectural pattern. A pattern is something that, an idea that we can reuse, a way of describing code or describing how to reuse ideas in code. So an architectural pattern allows us to find our way through code, right? So by knowing model view controller pattern, we get access to projects that we don't know about, and we get a way of finding out things about this project by knowing things beforehand that is given, right? So model view controller, right? Model was the domain rules, right? So it should encapsulate the domain. Okay, what does that mean? The domain is what not changes if you change the user interface. If you change the use cases, does not change even then, right? So in the domain of like web stores, we have like products, we have categories, we have prices, we have discounts, we have customers, we have customer address, we have like stuff that connects, that is the domain, right? So perhaps you've done a little bit of domain modeling, right? Or you're starting today, some of you, right? So the model encapsulates that and the rules that comes with that. Okay, model view. Okay, the view shows something to a user. So something is communicated to the user, and the view also allows the user to communicate back, right? So in the way of web applications, our PHP views creates HTML, it creates URLs, it creates CSS, it creates JavaScript so that the user can interact and get a web page, right? The user gets an experience with colors and text and stuff. All that is created by views. So the view creates something that we can view. But the view also allows us to interact with the application. So for instance, the view may create these buttons up here on GitHub, so I can choose how to view the same data. So in this case, there's a markdown file, right? And there are different ways of viewing that markdown file. So the markdown file, the text that I've written for this lecture, may be viewed in different ways. So for the same domain model, right, the text that I've written, we can have different views. So let's have Now we have this rendered view with, okay, these headers become black and stuff, but we can also have this raw view. So you can see how I've written the text, right? So that is another way of presenting the same information to us. So in the model, we have these rules and stuff, and we have products, perhaps in a web store. So one product can be displayed for you in different ways. Perhaps if you watch the web store on a mobile device, you only get a title for the product, you get a price, and you get an image, or something like that. And if you watch it on a full screen TV, whatever, we have really large images. We're perhaps showing you several images of the same product. We have a big description text. We show different discounts and other products on the same page. Right? So one model can have different views. It's the same data, the same rules can be displayed differently. So the view decides in what way we can communicate. So in some cases, we want just HTML links. Awesome. The Dalek has come, right? Someone's phone just said exterminate. Yeah, and I totally dropped what I was supposed to say. Thank you very much. Okay, so the same kind of, interaction can happen in different ways. Perhaps we can create hyperlinks, right? We have this text with an underline and blue colored or whatever you put in your CSS. Or you could create a form, a web form, or you can create these buttons or something like that. Or you can allow the user to like swipe stuff on a mobile device, or you can have different ways of interacting with an application. And that kind of interaction is tightly integrated to the way we present information, right? If we present a button, the user probably thinks that I can press that button. He does not think that I can write something, a command, right? If we present a command line, a command line, what is it called? Editor console. Yeah, if we present a command line console, he does not think that he can press stuff in that. So the kind of user interface also decides what kind of interaction I can do. Okay, so presentation and interaction go hand in hand. It's a protocol, right? The same thing that we talked about with HTTP was also a protocol, right? So if I show you something, I also show the way you can interact with this. And I expect an answer in the same kind of language that I've shown you. If I show you buttons, I expect button clicks. If I show you a console, I expect you to write stuff to me, right? Make sense? So, we have this model. And I have a view. And then I have the user always happy and always blue, right? Sorry. The user interacts with the view by input. I want to see the web page. The view creates the output. Okay, here is the web page. Yes, the view needs knowledge of the model in order to create some representation of it. If we have a web store, a product view must know something about the product. It must know the product's name and price and what kind of images are associated with that. So we have a relationship here. Okay, we had a third component in the model view controller. So that was the controller, right? So the controller, in this course, you can almost put an equal sign between the controller and the use case. So the controller decides what can be done in an application. Yes. So the controller component, do you know use cases? Everyone who has read a use case, just raise your hand, please. And online also. Oh, nice. I like. Okay. So the controller, if I put an equal sign to a use case and a controller, you remember use cases, something like this. The system presents a list of products for the user to select. The user selects a product to buy or to put in his shopping basket. The system acknowledges that the user has put a product in the shopping basket and shows a total price. Something like that, right? You've heard it, you've seen it. So it's an interaction between the system and the user. So that is the way I want controllers to be. The same thing in my controller classes would be like, we have a controller that is called like a shopping controller or something like that, and the controller asks the view, does the user want to buy a product? And the view can say, yes, he does, because he has filled in a form or pressed a button or clicked a link or something like that, or swiped his phone or whatever. And the controller says that, oh, here is the controller. So the controller needs knowledge of the view in order to interact with it, right? And then the controller knows, okay, the user wants to buy a product. Which product does the user want to buy? Oh, he swiped this product, or he clicked this product, or he written this product in the console view, right? Okay, so I get a product back. And the controller can ask the system to make the change. Okay, the user wants to buy this product. So in the model, we can have these products and categories and prices and stuff, right? And in the model, we can also have like an order. An order is a number of products that some customer wants to buy. Perhaps it has order lines and stuff, and you can buy several products of several items of one product, or something like that. So the controller asks the model to change its state so that we now have an order. It should be black, an order for that. And after that change has been done, the view can once again render a new page to the customer showing that, okay, here is your product, here is your shopping basket with the product you order, right? So you need these relationships. So the controller knows about the model and makes changes to the model, like through the model's interface. Like, user wants to buy this product, and then he sends, okay, this user and this product to the model. And the model creates this order with order lines and stuff. And the view can, after this interaction, can create a new web page for the user to view, right? By looking at the model, okay, I want all this user's items. Okay, you get this order back. Okay, I render this order with HTML. Easy? Easy peasy. Something like that. Yes. Okay. Let's look at some code and see if we can recognize some parts of this. And I know that there will be a lot of code on the screen. You want to know what everything is. And when we look at a lot of code, I won't know what everything is. I need to find my way through that code. So unknown code is coming, and it's more than one class, and it's more than one screen. So we must build some kind of model in our head in order to understand this, right? And that's not going to happen in one day, right? You need to read a lot of code to build these models easily. I got a question from Amanda. What kind of response do we get from the controller? Booleans or pure strings? Okay. I guess that that is sort of a weird weird question. Okay, from the view, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we get in response, and it will be easier when we see the code, I think. But from the view, we'll try to get as high abstraction objects as possible. So I think that we're going to look at the code, and hopefully I can answer your code there. What I mean is the responsibility of the view or the controller to formulate a response? Okay, it is the controller's response to change the state by using the model, and it's the view's response to create a representation of that state for the user. So, but let's say that if you have a controller that can show different views to different use, or different views depending on where the user is in a use case. Like if you're in the first part of the use case, you're supposed to input your name and stuff like that. But when you've done that, you can input something else. So you can have different views. First, the controller says that okay, you should show the input name field, and the second part is that you should show the shopping basket, whatever, like that. So, but that is on a high level. So a controller never creates a line of HTML. More than when we're really lazy, right? Yes. Okay, code. Code approaching. Okay. So we have a user picker application. I'm starting in the index. We might want to increase the size a little bit. Okay, you in the back, can you read this? You online, can you read this? Okay, so what we see is that, okay, I write a couple of lines in the top just to start error handling. This is normally done in the file php.ini. So that's the place you should do it. But if you have no access to that file, you can always start here, right? And it's really important to do this, because if you don't show error messages, you will only get blank screens when there's an error. And that will be very frustrating. Sometimes in PHP you get blank screens anyway. And you need to binary search your way to the error by creating output at different locations. You're probably going to do that. Okay, then I require a couple of files. You don't need to know more than, okay, before I start using a class, I need to require that class, because that class is in another file, so the PHP interpreter needs to know about the class we're creating. Otherwise, it cannot run it, right? So the require once, and I always use the require once. There are a couple of other methods also called include once, and require, that does the same thing but a little different. You can check them up. I always use the require once. That's the only one you ever need, I think, except if you're doing the full hack thing, ugly hack again. Okay, then we're creating a couple of objects. And in this case, we're starting with a model. It's kind of a simple model. So we have user. And we also have user array. That is a collection of users, right? So user array has 0, wrong place, right? Is it wrong place or not? In a while you will know, right? Just drawing an arrow. One user array has 0 or more users. Okay, that is more or less the thing. We also have a way of saving users, and that is called a selected user data access layer. Have you heard about data access layer? Oh, good. So it's really a class. Selected user that the user array, we can see that it knows about the user doll, right? Because it gets a doll object in its constructor, so it must know about this. And the selected user doll knows about users. We cannot know this from just the lines here. We must check the class, but I can guarantee it does, since I've written it this morning. So this is the model. Pretty much, does not say much. It says that there are users, there are a collection of users, and one special user can be saved somewhere, right? So if we have a couple of people, and we want to select one of those, perhaps the one who's supposed to do the dishes today, right? So who of all of you are going to do the dishes today? Maybe we can select that person, and maybe we create an application so that everyone can see who has been selected to do the dishes, and perhaps that someone can select who are going to do the dishes, perhaps the boss dude or the Dalek. Yes. So, and I add, you can see that the user array has a method called add. So just to get a starting state, I add 2 users. It's me and Tobias. You know Tobias? Yeah. That is Tobias and Tobias' address. I'm probably not living at that address, but it sounded fun. It's a Swedish address. We're waiting for winter now. It felt like winter this morning, so. Okay, so a user array we can add users to it. So it somehow holds those users into. Okay, let's look at the code here of those classes before we look at the view classes. So this is a typical data class. It's the user. It's in the namespace model to show that it's a model class, right? And you write namespaces like that. That becomes the namespace for the entire file. So every name you call will be called model.thatName. So if you have like, you get an error like, okay, you're in a view class and you've used the namespace view and you're trying to access a model class, and you just write the model class name like user, you will get an error. I don't know what a user is because there is no view user, right? So you need to speak the namespace language. And if I want to access this method outside of it, I need to write user. Just to make my point clear, let's go back to the index file and check here. So I access it by its namespace. Okay, it contains two private members, name and address, takes those in its constructor, saves that information into member variables, and provides accessor methods for those member variables. So we can create an object of this, and if we have an object of that, we can get the information out of the object. Simple. Okay, what about the user array? It has an array of users as a member variable, and you can see here I've initiated that array. Up here, I could have done it in the constructor also. And we had a method called add. And what that does here is that I put the user that I want to add in the back of the array. So a user array contains an internal member array, and we can put users into that array, and they are put in the back of that array. And you can see that in the constructor, I do stuff. I get this data access layer class, and I also put that class in a member variable, right? So I save that for later use. Actually, I'm going to use it on the next line, right? So the person that has been selected, that information, who that person is saved in this select user data access layer class. So the first thing I do is that I access that method and gets the selected user from that. So I ask, okay, who has been selected to do the dishes? Oh, it's the selected dude, the member variable. And does anyone see a small mistake? The selected word is not up here, right? Yeah, it is. Oh, sorry. Didn't make that mistake. I hope I did. So I could actually not have written selected up here. But it's a good practice to do that, and I get a private member. The code would still work if I didn't, but I would get a public member on that object only. So PHP is like JavaScript and such horrible, such beautiful languages, so it adapts when you do stuff to it. That's one way of making stuff harder for programmers to find errors. Yeah. Okay. So it also contains a public method for selection of the disher boy, disher dude. So here you can see that I select someone, I put it in my local buffer, the selected user, and I also save the selection to the data access layer so that we can access him later. So you know that the web is sort of stateless, right? Do you know what state is? State is like what we save, what we keep. So between two different calls to the same server, I may or I may not change the state. If I'm looking at a product, the state of that product, the number of items in the store or something like that, does not change if I reload the page, right? Unless someone buys something, that is changing the state. So we can not change the state by reloading, or I can buy stuff and then I change the state, right? I put something in my shopping basket, I change the state. Now I'm selecting some users, so I need to change the state. And I make that temporary by changing the state in the member variable. And I make that change of state permanent by saying to the data access layer that, okay, this should be saved somewhere. Okay, then I provide a way of knowing who has been selected. It just creates my local, it just uses my local buffer here. So it's an accessor for that member variable. I got a question if there's a difference between doing this and using the method array push. Okay, it's so much easier for you to look up that difference by checking the documentation for array push. Right. I sort of have a lot of details in my head, but I try to keep as little of an API in those details. Because APIs change. I changed languages. Next year I'm not going to tell the students about PHP. I'm going to tell them about some other language or some things that are language independent. So please check that up and provide the answer to us. It may or may be a difference. I don't know. Sorry for the read the fucking manual answer, but yeah, I don't know. That is the true answer. Okay. I provide an accessor for the entire array of users so that someone who wants to perhaps render these users in HTML, create an HTML representation of this user, can do that. And I also provide a means of accessing a single member of this array by providing a healthy method. And it contains something that is not so good. Does not contain a return value down here. Another way that PHP makes it horrible, or makes it, it's a feature in the language that if you don't provide a return statement, you get null back. I think it's a good idea to write it. I didn't do it because I forgot it. And PHP never told me that I forgot it, since it's not an error in PHP. I just loop through the array and check if the name is the same as the string that I got. Okay, I return that user, right? It's a sort of typical model data class, really, like the last one. Okay, the user was a sort of data class, it contains some data. This one contains a little bit more logic. We can access one member out of this array. We can add people, and we also provide an interface to a data access layer. Eric Hamrin writes that the difference is it has the same effect, but you can push an arbitrary number of items, like array push something something. Yeah. Awesome, thank you. Okay, we have one more class in the model, and that is the select user data access layer. And this is one quick bad thing, sort of a fool hack. Just to show you how easy it can be to save files in PHP. Don't take this as good practice. This is a typical solution that will burn up in the future. I'm not using a database here. I probably should save things in a database, because databases are sort of independent on how, like, how my code is written. In this case, let's look at the code and see what it does. It's, okay, I've got a private member here. It's a static. What does that mean? Anyone knows? Yeah.
One object from that class. Yeah.
Yeah, all objects of that class is sharing the static members. So if you have 100 selector user doll objects, they all share the same memory for this string. So all has the same string. So if I change it in one, I change it in all. In this case, it's the file name. It's the file that I'm going to save who has been selected to do the dishes. And you can see that in the get save user could be called load the saved selected user, perhaps, maybe a better name. I access that file by using one method of the API that is called file get contents. Then I get the entire file as a large string. And if there's some error, perhaps the file does not exist, I get a false back. So I must check for that. If there is something else than a false back, I know that I've gotten the file and the content of that file. And then I unserialize that. I create an object from a string, something magical. Sort of hard to understand what it does, and sort of hard to look at that file and understand what is in it. Okay, so let's look at the save selection. Here I get a user that I want to save here, and I serialize that user. I create a string representation of that user, and then I put that in the same file. So basically, I'm saving users, and I'm getting them back, right? And I get objects back. It's very much a full hack. So I get a good question from Amanda here. Anyone knows what that what is that called? Snabel A. At sign. The Snabel A here. It's an awesome Swedish word. That sign is another full hack. Anyone knows what it's about? It's suppressing warnings. So in PHP, where we get just a little bit of errors and warnings and notices when something goes wrong, perhaps I want to suppress that warning. I don't want to hear it. So I don't want to hear the error when the file is not existent. Oh, this is a really bad practice. I should not show you this. Don't do this. Because it will result in problems like, okay, you're not allowed to write. Oh, I actually had an error. I did this. I omitted the little dollar sign. And the error you get if you omit a dollar sign is that, okay, there is no such thing as file name, right? Or you've tried to access a static member variable in the wrong way. There's no constant name file name, perhaps it says. I didn't see that error since I suppressed it. So it's not just errors from the file get contents, it's all the errors, if I understand it correctly, from that line. But sometimes in PHP, that is the only way of handling certain problems. In this case, what I should have done is, does the file exist? Because it's probably a method called file exist or something like that exists in the API. So the alternative in this case would be try catch. So this is not an exception. That is the problem. If it was a file not exist exception, then I could try catch and catch this error. There is a difference between PHP errors and exceptions. PHP errors is the horrific, the thing that we had before exceptions. We can actually write an error handler that creates exceptions from PHP errors, but that is totally different thing. Okay, you know the model now, right? Good. So am I moving too fast? No, too slow. Yes, okay. So what happened to the model? Okay, we set up the model. Now we understand that. So now we have set up and constructed a model containing 2 users. And now I create a view, and I send this model object to the view. And you do remember that the view were allowed to see the model. The arrow was in that direction. So a view is allowed to view a model, unless we'll have a pretty difficult time doing things to that model. So I create a view, and what happens to the view and the model? Yeah, it's sent, both items are sent into the controller. But let's look at this view before we look at the controller. So here, no, yes. Yeah. So this is the view. You can see it namespace view, but I've also created a view in the name of the class. It's sort of duplication of information, right? And I'm not very happy about it, but I wanted to put all the files in the same folder. So if I have a user and a model user, and then I have a view user, those 2 things might get mixed up, right? So in this case, just to make myself clear, I'm having a user view. It's sort of dependent on the kind of tools you're using to write your code also. And not sure that I'm actually not lying now, but I think that in my Sublime does not tell me what the namespace is of the file. So if I have 2 files called user, one is in the model and one is in the view, I cannot see the difference just by looking at the tabs. So that is the way. That is why I sometimes duplicate the view into the name. It might be a user array view because we're really working with user array. Okay, it has a private static member variable, something that is common for all items, and it also has an array of users. And we can see that in the constructor, I get a parameter with this array. We can see that it has the full model namespace here. If I forgot that little slash, I would the interpreter would think that it would be view model user array class, and would say that there is no class called that. So that is why I have this little slash up here. You can have these use directives also if you want to, but let's not talk about that now. Okay, the view has 2 basic different type of functions, methods. One is get selected user. We said that views did 2 things, right? It provided output, and it also provided a means of communication back, right? So this is the means of communicating back. It is badly documented. Does not say what it does really, almost. If there is a selected user, it returns as a user object. If it's no selected user, it returns null. That is what it does. Let's not look at the code there. Just look at the other method that provides the output. Here we have some user that is selected. And I could almost have written the class name up here, but I didn't. There's a reason for that. I didn't want to make this code unnecessarily complicated. But this method is the method that creates HTML from a model, right? So in the model, we have 2 things. We have an array of users that I access down here. And for each user in that array, I create an input HTML form item stuffy thingy. A submit button for each. And then I name this using this static member variable so that I know what I'm supposed to check for later. And I set the value to the name of that user. So each button, for each user there will be a button, and its value will be the name of that user, right? And all these buttons have the same input name. You know what an input name is? If you submit a form, you need to know somewhere what the different items in this form, like the different input fields, what are they named? So we tag the information with a name, right? And I choose to use this private member variable to tag this information. You can see that I build a string. I start a string up here with a header. You can see that I dot equal, that means I build upon, I concatenate the stuff that was in the string is kept, and I build upon it with the rest. So it's the same thing as writing ret equals ret dot, and then the rest of the string, right? So we build a string from a short string to larger string, right? Okay. So down here, I created an HTML representation. And this HTML representation provided a means of communication back, right? It created a form. And the form will send stuff, since I didn't specify any action or, oh, what's the other thing? Method. Since I don't specify the method, it will be sent by get method, the HTTP get method, right? So the information will be sent in URL. Have you seen a URL before? Have you done an input field in a form? You've done that, right? Hopefully, sometime. Okay. Since I didn't specify any action, this form will post to the same location as the form was generated from, right? So if this was generated from index.php, the form information will be sent to index.php by a HTTP post. No, get, sorry. Getting confused. Okay. Let's ignore the selected stuff for now, and let's just look a little bit further up so we can understand how that information is returned. So when someone presses a submit button, the form is posted, but it's posted by get, right, to the server again. And all the information in the URL behind question mark is divided into different fields in an array. So if you've seen that question mark in URL, right? And you've seen that it can be like name equals and surname equals something like that, right? A typical URL. So it's splitted on the equal signs. That thing is removed. This becomes the key of the array. So if we have an array we have an array called get, $_get, that array would contain nam and that thing would have Daniel in it, right? And the other one, the other index, CERN, would have Toll in it, right? And if there was no thing here, like address, there is no address in this URL, right? So if I ask for the address of this get and I now write address, that will not exist, does not exist right now, okay? So I cannot ask for that. So in PHP, you have a means of asking for stuff, and it's called isSet. So the first thing, if the user did not provide an input, I must check, does it exist any input? Right. So that is what I do. And now you can see that I'm using that private static thing again. And the reason for that is, so you can see, okay, the URL will be like picked equals Daniel, or picked equals Tobias, right? The reason for providing this is that the same string is in different locations. It's up here, and it's, let's see, down here. So in order to make sure that these two strings, because they must always be the same thing, in order to ensure that they are always the same thing, I create a private static member variable, right? I could have written picked down here, just in the string, and I could have written picked up there, up here, just the string picked, right? I could have written that. But this is a string dependency, and I want to make sure that I never do anything wrong with these string dependencies. So I create this private static. Okay. If that variable is set, then I can access the information in it. So I get the position in get, and I access it, and I just put it in a local variable called input. And then I ask the model, and this, in this case, it's the user array. Okay, do you have a user called this? The thing that if it had a user, I return that user, right? If it didn't, I actually throw an error, because it means that someone has probably tried to change the URL, right? Oh.
When you throw in the exception,
yes.
do you need to use the group namespace?
Yes, since I'm in the view. So if I do not, I will get an error saying that I don't know what view/exception is, right? Okay. So views create HTML, provides means of communication back, and in this case, provides a high abstraction level output to the controller, right? It's not providing the name of the user. It's providing the user object, right? It's not providing a position in get. It's providing the actual object of the user that you select, right? It's a higher abstraction level. Yeah. Okay, let's look at the controller. It's almost not any code in it. The controller does two things. It handles the input and and makes changes to the model, and it also provides means of providing the right view to output it. So this is the most important part. It asks the view which user has been selected. And if there is a selected user, it asks the model, OK, you're going to select this user. And then the model is saving that selected user in its doll class, right? And the other thing was that it provides output. And you can see that it extracts the selected user from the model and sends it to the view. Actually, the view could do this itself. The reason for me to show you this is that you can decide to have more or less stupid views. You can have smart views, and you can have stupid views, right? Smart views extract information. I don't know the academic term for it. You might want to ask Tobias about it. But smart views extract information themselves, perhaps keep state in them. And dumb views, this is something sort of both, right? Might need to be filled in with information, sort of. OK, that was the entire code of the application. Hopefully, we can try it out in like 15 minutes if someone knows a smart way of sharing screens with a Linux application. OK, thank you very much. I'm going to close down the sound a short while. OK. I'm resuming recordings, and thanks to BB222BX, we got screen sharing with my laptop. So, OK, here's the application, very advanced output, right? Pick a user, no selection has been done. So, and then we have two buttons, Daniel and Tobias. There is no input up here in the URL. We're inputting through the URL, right? And there's no input right now. And the web server, in this case Apache, perhaps version 2, has been configured so that it will display index.php if no input is given, right? You can configure the web server to show another page. So if we're writing an application, we should always maybe not assume that the web server will be configured in a certain way. But I've done it anyway. I could write index.php up there. OK. If I take a look at the files, you can see here are the files. I don't have any saved user right now, so I haven't picked the user. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to pick myself. Oh, check it out. It's an error. Yeah, there's a bug in my code. Awesome. Oh, actually, I don't need to do that. Sorry. Like that. OK. I just moved that code, so never tested it. Always test before showing stuff to other people. They might notice that you're not perfect if you don't. So always test. Never show a weakness or that you can do errors. People will think that you're human. OK, we can see it. We've properly created an HTML presentation of the selected user and also the list of users, right, or their user array. So we can see that Daniel lives at Snöfallsvägen 13, and we can see that there are two users. Awesome. We can check the, and we can see that, oh, there's a file now, the saved user. Oh, you don't see it. Why is that? Oh, okay, the black logger is not working. Oh, so here's the file. You can see that I've selected it, selected user. That was the file name that I put in this private static variable in the doll class. And you can see that it's sort of hard to understand that kind of information in that file because it's saved binary, I think. I don't know, but I think. Or at least Sublime thinks that also. So that is why it's showing me this information as binary. So it's sort of hard to read that file, and sort of hard if I change how a user works, this file will not be valid anymore. So serialize with care. Right. Okay. That was the select user application. So let's take a look at another application, very similar, but with a different scenario. In this case, we're going to pick colors. We're writing a Photoshop tool, right? So that is our use cases are like, okay, the person in Photoshop, the user, wants to pick a color that he's going to draw on the photo with, right? So we need to pick a color from a selection of colors. I call that selection of colors a palette. Do you know what a palette is? Is that a proper English word? I have no idea. Palette. Palette. You can see this has been written 2 years ago, so I'm not that familiar with this code as the code before. You can see that I have a session color persistor. Awesome name for a class. This tells to me that I'm saving state in the session, which makes sense if you're writing a Photoshop application. You want to know which color the user selected for the entire session the user is using the program, right? So you want to know which color has he selected during this program, but when the session ends, when it closes down the program, the session ends, and we don't need to know that anymore. We don't need to save it on a file. So we save it in the session. And you can see that I've inputted a position in the session, color session location. And I put that in the constructor. Also, I have a controller. It's called select color. And I input the persistence into the controller. That is called a dependence injection. Very important for your next class in the 3rd grade and something like that. I inject a dependence into that constructor. And after that, I ask the controller to select the color, but I have not divided things up into output or an input handling like I did before, right? Before I first ask the controller to handle the input, and then I ask the controller, okay, I want the output. Now I'm doing both things at once. So let's take a look at the model classes first, because they are not obvious here. So I have a color. A color consists of 3 different parts here. There are different schemes for colors, smyk colors and stuff. This is an RGB color space. And I use floats or numeric values between 0 and 1 to represent the value of a color. So red has a value between 0 and 1. Green has a color between 0 and 1. And blue has a color between 0 and 1. Right? This can be translated into a color value between like 0 and 255. Are you more used to that? Right? But you know colors. You've seen colors. Right? That is what we normally see. You can see a color, in this case a model object of color, since a color is a part of the drawing picture domain. That drawing picture domain probably has a picture, a color, a palette, and stuff like that. You can see we have a constructor. And through this construct, oh, sorry, totally wrong computer. Through this construct, I get the color values. And you can see that I've asserted that these values are within the allowed ranges. This is to make sure that if someone sends me a value like up to 255, that I will throw an, or I will assert an error on them. Poor bastards. And then I set these member variables. And you can see that I have no access methods here because I'm so lazy 2 years ago. So I don't have a get red. I don't have a get blue. I probably should have. I've just made them public. It's sort of, if you have a really simple class like this, and there is no logic in this class, you can do this. But if there's a bit of logic, or if there's prone to be errors, you're probably going to add those get and set stuff. OK. Then we had a palette. And palette is wrong computer again. Yes. A palette is a number of colors. And in this case, it's sort of complicated stuff. But we have a number of variations. And we also have this persistence object. The number of variations I'm going to show you a little bit later. A persistence object that where we can save the color that we have selected. We also provide a blue value here, right? A palette is a two-dimensional thing, right? Normally, if we're going to pick stuff on that palette. We can make like three-dimensional palettes also, but in this case, I've made it simple. I just wanted a two-dimensional. But since I have 3 dimensions, the red, green, and blue, I removed the blue and made it two-dimensional. So I make a palette with red and green and set the blue to one value, right? Perhaps I'm going to show you how that looks like, just so that you've seen a palette. And so here is a palette. So there's a specific value for blue here, and so you don't see any scale of blue right now. Yeah. OK. From a palette, we have a number of colors, and we can get that array of colors back. So an array of color object. We can also ask, OK, what is the selected color? Like we asked, what is the selected user before, right? Then I can get the selected color. And as you can see, I ask the persistence object of that. I don't have this selected buffer that I had in the other solution, right? And then I can set the selected color. And you can see it's sort of the same thing. A color object comes in here instead of a user object. And I ask the persistence class, in this case, to save it. And then I can also create a palette. And this is a private member. Private means that it's only used, this member method is only used within this class. And it's actually used in a constructor up here. So I create a palette when I've set this number of variation and color persistence. So what I do is that I make sure that the blue value is also between 0 and 1. And then I create 2 for loops intertwined between each other. And then I just create each color of this array, right? And I add all those colors into this color array. So after calling this, there will be a lot of colors in this color array. Yes, that is the model. We can check out the session persistor thingy also. So this class responsibility is to make sure that within 2 reloads of the same page, we remember which color we have selected. So we have a special place in the session that we save this so that we can have several of these. And you can see that I save the session location. I make sure that we have a session by using this asserts. And when I load it from the session. So I check, is a certain place, it's better to save it first. When I save it to a special location in the session location that I've inputted through the constructor, and I just put the color into that position. And when I load it, I make sure that it's set first, like with the input, right? And I ask for that location. If it's set, I return it. If it's not set, I throw an exception. Okay. That was the model. Let's check out the view first. It consists of two classes. The first one is a visual color. Could be color view, but the visual color takes a model color. The model color was this data object with 0 to 1 spaces, right? But this one creates HTML from a color. So you can see that it takes a color in its constructor, and I have some internal method called getColorCSSInternal, but really I create a p tag here with some representation of it. I create a div tag, and I also create some style here that comes from this internal method. So this is just an example on how to create CSS with PHP. So this here it is. This private method uses the color red, green, and blue members to create RGB values between 0 and 255, and then creates a CSS line from that. So PHP can create CSS, HTML, images, whatever. Yeah. Yes. So, but the content of this class is we get one model object, we create visual representation as HTML, some string really from that object. Okay, we have another view also. This was not it. It's the color picker view. You can see that it's also in the namespace view. It's using the visual color. It has a private static color input location so that I know which place in the color, which place in the get that I'm supposed to look for this, what color the person clicked on. It takes a palette so it can, that it's supposed to represent. It contains access methods for user selections. These can be used by the controller in order to know what the user wants. This is another access method. You can see that I'm using almost the same pattern here, right? I ask for the color that the user has selected. I make sure that that is one of the colors that I've shown to the user. And I return the color object, a high-level abstraction object, a model object from the view. This was the color that the user selected, and not a string or a place in the get or something like that. I throw an error if something is wrong. And then I have these methods that are creating HTML. You can see that I'm doing a bit of string concatenations. I extract information from this, these other private methods, and then I build up a string using these member variables. And these member variables are just to make stuff a bit more simple. Okay, it's a lot of code. Down here, we have a lot of the code that builds up this image of the palette. For each of the colors, I create a link for that color. And I do stuff like pixel stuff. Typical things that we would see in a view, but nowhere else. Okay. Let's check out how it works. So up here I have the selected color. If I click on a color, that color becomes selected. You can see that the information comes in the URL. It's exposed in the URL. If I reload the page without that information, the selected color is kept in the session. Yes. So now you've seen two different solutions for these things. You'll learn that views, okay, they get information from the user, they write information to the user, the controller, something to do with the use case, and the model is something to do with the domain. So, yeah. I think I skipped the controller. Just to make sure that you've seen the controller for this one also. The first part is, okay, we ask the user for high-level input. Has the user selected a color? If he has done that, what kind of color did the user select? And then we make changes to the state, right, in the model. We set the state changed in the model. In this case, the model is the palette, so it has a selected color. And we output stuff afterwards. Handle input first, always. Output stuff after, always. Okay. A lot of code, right? Sort of hard to keep everything in your head, right? Sort of hard to understand everything. So you need this map, and you need to be able to focus on a little part of the code at a time. I guess most of you didn't follow through on this last one, right? But you could see some similarities, hopefully, with the one we did slower and previous, right? So I'm using the same pattern to build both of these applications. The pattern may have some variations. I do things a little bit different depending on what kind of application I'm writing, but I can reuse the pattern, the way of putting things into use, the way of communication, the way of thinking of how I'm going to divide these classes into different components. Okay. So we're going to step back a little bit and take a look at more of input. So I've said that the view can be used to see as a layer towards the user. We create these links, we create these forms, and we also provide high-level interface to the controller for the controller to use, so that the controller does not need to know anything about HTML. The controller does not need to know anything about HTTP. The controller does not need to know if it's a console application or a web application or a interactive application with slides and stuff, or a game or whatever. The controller does not need to know that. The controller should look like the use case. Okay, have you seen that input that was in the URL or from the URL are put into this magic super global array called get? The URL, we're using that for links, right? We're using that for when we want the user to be able to bookmark or share something, right? So everything that the user should be able to share with someone else, like a product, we should probably have that information. What product are you looking at? That information should be in the URL. So the user can easily put that on his Facebook page or whatever. But get is really easy to manipulate. Most of us have done it sometime we've seen something that was wrong up here, and we've changed that 2 to 1. Right? You've done that. You've accessed a product that no one can buy anymore just by having a link to it. Perhaps? I've done that, at least. OK, posts. You know that forms can be posted. Posts are done when we will have a massive amount of information that we don't want the user to bother with. Perhaps for user benefit, hidden information. You don't want to know. You don't need to know this. This is internal stuff in the application. That sort of thing should be sent in post instead. Like when you submit a lot of information in a form, you don't want to see all that information in the URL. Since we know about HTTP and HTTP request, we do not think that post is completely hidden and safe and stuff like that. We know that for things to be safe, we need to have an encrypted communication channel like HTTPS. OK. For what do we use cookies? We use cookies to simulate state. So the web is or should be stateless. This means that if I have a variable in PHP, the next time the application starts, that variable will be reset. It will lose its value. Everything is lost between every reload of the page, unless we save something in a file and we load that file, right? Or we save something in a database and we load that database, or we save something in a cloud API, and we reload something from that cloud API, or we put it in the session. So the session is a way of putting state into application. You've seen it in the color picker application, right? I could save something in a magical super global variable called session. And I can start and stop sessions and stuff like that. Cookies, sessions are enabled by cookies. So session works like this. The programmer wants to start the session in order to save state to the next reload. The programmer says, OK, I want to start the session by calling the method called start session. And a cookie is written to the client with a long ID. This cookie is normally called PHP session ID. The next time the user reloads the page, this cookie and all other cookies are transferred to the server with the HTTP request, right? So on the server, behind the scenes, the session cookie is read. It unlocks a file, and the information in that file is unserialized, like you've seen today, into the session array. So the information in the session array is restored between each reload. So we can store things that if we want them to be used later. Like if someone logs into an application, that is sort of a state change, right? We can save that login information in the session. Yes. So cookies enable that. Cookies can enable other things, like we reload the page, but we want the user to save some state, perhaps where have been before, like breadcrumbs. It's called breadcrumbs, right? Mm-hmm. Yes. Awesome. I know the web. I know breadcrumbs. OK. Like that kind of information could be good to put in cookies. There is a super global array called files. Uploaded files, really. All this, except the session thingy, is input into the application. Yes. Let's say that session is not a good thing if we want to have an application that is distributed among several servers, because this session file is only saved on one server. So if you want state in a stateless world, you perhaps want to use like encrypted cookies or something like that instead, but it's sort of outside of this course. I just want to say that I know this, and it's not totally. I've added a couple of links that can be good to examine. This is just when we're communicating things, we need to have a protocol for that communication. Like if I send you some bits, you need to know how to interpret those bits, right? We talked about it last lecture. This is the same thing. If we want to send something, we want to build up a URL, and we want to have some information into that URL that is not supposed to be in a URL, like certain characters are not allowed. We can change those characters into the proper characters, and we can change them back. These are the methods that you can check. Here are some good information. If you like JavaScript and you want to communicate to a JavaScript client application, you can use JSON. You know JSON? Yes, awesome. Here is something that you can use if you want to send like images or binary things in a text, and you want to make sure that text thing does not mess things up. Okay. Okay, the general problem with input from a user or from a client is that if we get the wrong input into our program and we don't handle that wrong input correctly, we get an erroneous state. The state in our application contains an error, right? So if, let's say that we create a user called Daniel and an address called Snöfallsvägen 13, but I write a lot of, like 1,000 white spaces behind Daniel when I input this in the field. Then when we want some pretty HTML output, maybe not that one, maybe it messes something up. Let's ignore that. Let's say Daniel needs to input his social security number instead. We provide an input field for that and don't think about it anymore. Store it as a string. It seems that Daniel, stupid user, but happy, you know, happy and blue, does not know which of these different ways of inputting a social security number that is the correct way. So he's just picking one of those, right? Because he does not know which one you intended. But you've written a lot of code that says that this is the standard way, and since I want to extract what day you're born, since I want to give you some happy birthday email spam, that all that happy birthday email spam won't work with Daniel's. Perhaps it will result in a crash, right? So if we get a faulty input, it creates an erroneous state that may or may not lead to a fault. Something that is visible, something that is ugly, some exception or whatever shown to the error, to the user. And he's maybe not that happy anymore. Twitching. Yeah. Some of you knows, but not everyone, knows that I can replace that minus sign in a Swedish social security number with a plus sign. Did you know? It's still a correct social security number. So the next time you do that, please check out that thing. I'm not going to tell you why. Okay. There are things called filters. Filters are supposed to help users to do the right thing. We can create a filter that only allows me to input the social security number in the correct way, right? There are only supposed to be numbers in the first part, and there are only supposed to be numbers in the second part. And there are only supposed to be a plus sign or a minus sign in middle, right? So we can have some kind of validation or some kind of filter that only allows the correct information to flow through. We can even like trim away errors that the user does. If a user posts a forum post in our forum and we don't allow them to use HTML and they just happen to have a link in there with HTML, we can just remove that link. Right? We help the user to provide better input, to never put us in an erroneous state. We can do that by positive or negative filtration. You've heard about regular expressions, right? PHP supports those. I've given the link for you. There is also a couple of ready-made filters for like email addresses and stuff like that that you can check out. Yeah. There's also the threat of what's it the JavaScript include problem called? The JavaScript include hack. I have like 1 and 50 minutes of lecture, and I don't remember the last 10 minutes. Now, just ignore that. The filtration and the help for the user, we can move that closer to the user, perhaps into JavaScript that will help the user to only input the correct information, right? That kind of filtration and validation help for the user is a duplication, really, of something that we also want on the server. So we never want a user object with a faulty social security number. So we need some rule in the model that says that we only allow these kind of input fields, or we only allow these kind of social security numbers. We don't allow people to have 37 numbers or something like that. But by duplicating that kind of rule into the view, we can also use that duplication to help the user. So validation can happen in the view to help the user and to provide like higher level input. But most validations that is really domain rules should be a part of the domain. So make sure in the constructor of your domain objects that you get correct input, right? In your views, you provide error handling. You make sure that users can input the correct stuff. You create input fields that only take the correct sort of characters and stuff like that. We also need to talk about, but I'm run out of time, really. You should check up on SQL injections. This is really important. There is a really, really simple solution to not getting these problems. It's called parameterized questions. And it's this one that you should check. I've always used my SQLi before, but it seems that it sort of has gone out of fashion since I think it was, no, I don't remember. This is the last minutes of the lecture, right? So I don't remember things anymore. But the cool guys are using PDO instead. So yeah, so protect yourself against SQL injections. There's also this JavaScript injection thing is you should validate that if you ask for a username, perhaps, that you only get the username with the proper characters, that you don't get HTML, you don't get JavaScript, And you can use the methods that I've written up on top of that, or you can use some of these guys, the add slashes and the HTML entities that translate into safer strings. Yeah. Okay. The campus guys seem very ready to go. And I'm going to release you now. Thank you very much.